The Senate Parliamentarian stands as one of the most powerful yet least visible figures in American politics, serving as the guardian of parliamentary procedure and the referee of complex legislative rules. While members of the House and Senate have consulted with experts since the creation of the federal government, they institutionalized these offices in the 20th century. The Speaker of the House first named an official parliamentarian in 1927, and the Senate followed suit in 1935. To understand the significance of this crucial position, we must examine its origins, evolution, and growing influence in shaping American lawmaking. Before the Senate Parliamentarian existed as an official position, the chamber relied on informal advisors to navigate the complexities of parliamentary procedure. Charles Watkins had arrived in the Senate in 1904 from Arkansas to work as a stenographer. Blessed with a photographic memory and a curiosity about Senate procedures, he eventually transferred to the Senate floor as journal clerk. Watkins was no ordinary clerk. In 1919, he started what became a 45-year search of the congressional record, back to the 1880s, for Senate decisions that interpreted the body's individual standing rules to the legislative needs of the moment. In 1923, Watkins replaced the ailing Assistant Secretary of the Senate as unofficial advisor on floor procedure to the presiding officer. For 12 years, he served in this unofficial capacity, becoming the Senate's de facto parliamentarian long before the title was formally recognized. The transformation from informal advisor to official position came during a period of significant legislative activity. Finally, in 1935, at a time when an increased volume of New Deal-era legislation expanded opportunities for procedural confusion and mischief, he gained the actual title. During the mid-1930s, the increase in New Deal legislation proposed by the Roosevelt administration made the legislative process more confusing. The office was created in 1935. On July 1, 1935, Charles Watkins officially became the first Senate parliamentarian, cementing a role that would become indispensable to the functioning of the upper chamber. The office finds its roots in the Constitution itself. The office of the parliamentarian has its roots in Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, which says that each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, and that each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings. This constitutional mandate provided the legal foundation for establishing formal procedures and maintaining institutional knowledge. The early parliamentarians faced the monumental task of creating order from decades of precedent. Thomas Jefferson played a key role in the early process of compiling the operational rules of the House and the Senate when he published his Manual of Parliamentary Practice in 1801. Building on Jefferson's work, the parliamentarians began the systematic compilation of Senate procedures and precedents that continues today. Charles Watkins became legendary for his encyclopedic knowledge of Senate procedure. At that 1955 tribute to long-serving staff, South Dakota Senator Francis Case praised Watkins' command of parliamentary procedure. Once his mind clasps a point, it sets like a vice. He is as a seeing eye dog to guide the newcomers through parliamentary mazes and a rod and a staff to those who preside. This tribute captured the essential nature of the parliamentarian's role as both guide and guardian of institutional knowledge. As the Senate evolved, so did the role of its parliamentarian. Over the last 8 decades, the parliamentarian gradually became central to ensuring the orderly flow of legislation on the Senate floor. The position transformed from a simple advisory role to one of significant influence over the legislative process. The parliamentarian's growing importance reflected broader changes in how the Senate operated. Today, Senators' members spend less time on the floor, observing the legislative process in action. During the limited time in which senators are in Washington, their schedules are dominated instead by committee hearings, constituent meetings, and fundraisers. This shift meant that senators' increased dependence on the parliamentarian, whether or not they are presiding over the chamber, suggests an erosion of procedural knowledge in the Senate. The daily operations of the Senate came to depend heavily on the parliamentarian's expertise. One former parliamentarian, Floyd M. Riddick, observed that the position's primary duty is to advise the Senate's presiding officer on every procedure that he must rule on, or everything he should say even. This intimate working relationship between the parliamentarian and presiding officers became the cornerstone of Senate operations. The parliamentarians' influence reached new heights with the creation of the Byrd Rule, named after Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia. During the early 1980s, Congress passed reconciliation bills containing provisions that did not directly relate to the budget. For example, one reconciliation bill decreased the number of individuals on the Federal Communications Commission. In response, Senator Robert Byrd led passage of an amendment to strike extraneous amendments from reconciliation bills, and Congress permanently adopted the Byrd Rule in 1990. In 1985 and 1986, the Senate adopted the Byrd Rule, named after its principal sponsor, Senator Robert C. Byrd, as a means of curbing these practices. The rule fundamentally changed the parliamentarians' role by giving them the authority to determine what could and could not be included in budget reconciliation bills, which require only a simple majority to pass, rather than the usual 60-vote threshold to overcome a filibuster. An important role of the parliamentarian is to decide what can and cannot be done under the Senate's budget reconciliation process, under the provisions of the Byrd Rule. These rulings are important because they allow certain bills to be approved by a simple majority, instead of the 60 votes needed to end debate and overcome a filibuster. This authority transformed the parliamentarian from an advisor into a gatekeeper of significant legislative power. The office has maintained remarkable stability throughout its history. Unlike many other positions in Washington, D.C., the office of the parliamentarian experiences very little turnover. The parliamentarians are expected to know extensive congressional precedent, so long-term institutional knowledge is essential. There have only been 6 Senate parliamentarians since the position was created in 1935. This continuity has been broken only rarely by political interference. The Senate Majority Leader may also fire the parliamentarian, as occurred in 2001 during a dispute between parliamentarian Robert Dove and Majority Leader Trent Lott. This dismissal highlighted the tension between the parliamentarian's non-partisan role and the political pressures of the legislative process. In 2012, a historic milestone was reached when Elizabeth McDonough is the only woman to hold the role. Elizabeth McDonough, born February 16, 1966, is an American lawyer and the parliamentarian of the United States Senate since 2012. She is the first woman to hold the position. McDonough's appointment represented not just a gender barrier broken, but also the continuation of the office's tradition of nonpartisan expertise. In recent years, the Senate parliamentarian has found themselves at the center of major political battles, particularly around budget reconciliation. On February 25, 2021, she ruled against the $15 minimum wage provision in President Biden's proposed COVID-19 relief package being included per the Byrd Rule under budget reconciliation. This decision sparked intense debate about the parliamentarian's role and authority. Most recently, in February 2021, McDonough, the Senate parliamentarian, ruled that the Democrats could not include a minimum wage increase in the COVID-19 economic relief package. Despite political pressure, the White House respected the decision, with the White House issued a statement saying the president was disappointed in the ruling, but respects the parliamentarian's decision. The parliamentarian's influence extends far beyond individual rulings. In 2016, former Speaker Paul Ryan, Wisconsin, reportedly recommended to Republicans that they closely follow the position's current occupant, Elizabeth McDonough, for clues as to how House-passed legislation to repeal and replace Obamacare would fare in the Senate. This recommendation demonstrated how the parliamentarians' anticipated rulings shape legislative strategy before bills even reach the Senate floor. The parliamentarian operates under a unique form of accountability that balances independence with political reality. The parliamentarians technically serve at the pleasure of the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, meaning they can be removed at any moment. Yet their effectiveness depends on maintaining credibility across party lines. Former parliamentarian Alan Frumin once said, "I know I've done my job when everyone thinks I'm somehow favoring the other side." This perspective captures the essential challenge of the role, providing impartial guidance in an inherently partisan environment while wielding significant influence over legislative outcomes. The rare instances of political override underscore both the parliamentarian's authority and its limits. In practice, this is rare. The most recent example of a vice president, as president of the Senate, overruling the parliamentarian was Nelson Rockefeller in 1975. That ruling was extremely controversial, to such an extent that the leaders of both parties immediately met and agreed that they did not want this precedent to stand. So the next week, the Senate altered the rule under consideration via standard procedure. Today's Senate parliamentarian operates in an environment of increased polarization and complex legislation. Anecdotes like these suggest that the Senate could not function without a parliamentarian. But for 146 years, senators interpreted the institution's rules and practices without a single authoritative voice to do so on their behalf. This observation highlights how fundamentally the Senate has changed since the office's creation. The current parliamentarian's responsibilities extend far beyond floor advice. McDonough guided the Senate through the first and second impeachment trials of Donald Trump, and she and her staff brought the Electoral College certificates to safety during the January 6th Capitol attack. These events demonstrate how the parliamentarian has become guardian not just of procedure, but of democratic institutions themselves. The Senate parliamentarian's role continues to evolve as American politics becomes increasingly complex and polarized. Recent controversies over budget reconciliation and calls to override parliamentarian decisions reflect ongoing tensions between procedural tradition and political expedience. Some progressive Democrats called for McDonough to be overruled on the matter, including Representative Ilhan Omar, who called for her to be fired. Yet the office's survival and continued respect across party lines suggests its enduring value to the institution. The parliamentarian serves as a constitutional anchor in turbulent political seas, ensuring that the Senate's procedures remain consistent regardless of which party holds power. From Charles Watkins's photographic memory to Elizabeth McDonough's digital age challenges, the Senate parliamentarian has evolved from an informal advisor to an indispensable guardian of democratic procedure. The history of the Senate parliamentarian reflects the broader story of American democracy. The ongoing challenge of balancing efficiency with deliberation, expertise with accountability, and tradition with adaptation. As the Senate continues to grapple with its role in an evolving democracy, the parliamentarian remains a quiet but crucial figure, ensuring that the world's greatest deliberative body maintains its commitment to the rule of law and orderly governance.